Hey everyone, welcome back to Gardenstategrowing, and boy, that sun is bright today. Oh my god. Today we are talking all about determinate tomatoes. Now today we're going to be planting a variety of tomato called the determinate tomato. Now there is a lot of different actual varieties of tomatoes, but there are two different types. There's indeterminate that will grow as tall as you could possibly trellis, 10, 15, 20 feet like I am doing this year, or the more humble determinate tomatoes that will grow on your patio, your back porch, your inside your house as long as you give it light, and they will grow shorter, stockier, usually more than 4 to 5 feet if you're doing a great job, which I know that you guys are doing. So you want to know how to do the determinate tomato, genetically predispositioned to grow only to a certain height and bush out. Now, there are two completely different ways that you can go about this. I do not treat my determinate tomatoes like I treat my indeterminate tomatoes. I don't prune them aggressively. I do not bury them as deep as they should be. So let me show you how I'm going to go about planting them. And I love to plant these in containers because they do, in my opinion, better in a container than they do in a raised bed, and I don't need them wasting room in a raised bed when I have the ability to put them in a container on my back deck. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put about an inch or two of mulch in the bottom of this pot. Now this pot is a large pot. It is 25 quarts, which is close to 5 gallons, or is 5 gallons, and I'm just going to put about 3 inches of wood mulch in the bottom of it. I don't want to put too much. If you put too much, it could lead to stem rot, so only a couple inches is fine. And then what I have here is a couple cups of perlite. This is going to help with drainage in the bottom of this pot, and I really only put the mulch down to stop the perlite from washing out of this pot. So now that I've got it filled with some perlite and some mulch, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add some soil. Now this is mushroom compost, which is fantastic for your tomatoes and any other vegetables, regardless of what people comment on my channel about. There's one person that's a little confused. It's okay. So I have that, and then I have a mix of perlite and vermiculite in this bucket that I'm going to just add to this mushroom compost. I'm going to mix it in pretty well. But before I go ahead and mix anything else into this, I'm going to mix it up, and then I'm going to add a little bit of my Dr. Earth's tomato and vegetable fertilizer. Not a lot, just about a handful. And I'm going to mix this up really good. And that's about it. All right, so what I have here is the golden nugget. This is a determinate plant. Again, it's only measured to grow to a certain size. I'm going to bring this out. And I'm going to be very careful with it because it is extremely tall, and you should not be planting plants that are this tall. You should be planting ones a lot smaller, but we're always trying to cheat Mother Nature in a certain way. All right, so what I have is a bucket of water that has it's a 5-gallon bucket, and it has about 3 tablespoons of the SuperThrive in it. This is my first year using it. I haven't seen really any benefit except before they harden off a little bit better, and they don't deal with transplant shock as much, which is good enough for me considering what the price is of this product. You don't need it. I wouldn't go crazy to find it, but it does seem to help with transplant shock. So if you're having that type of issue, maybe you want to add it to the water. But since I do have this plant completely root bound, okay, I'm going to take the tag out and I'm going to soak it in this SuperThrive 5-gallon bucket for a little bit until the soil loosens up and I can loosen those roots out of. As far as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the SuperThrive barely has a little bit of nitrogen in it. It more concentrates on vitamin B, vitamins. Like I said, this is my first year using it, so I'm not going to sit here and endorse it or not. I'm just going to use it for this application. We'll see at the end of the season if it did any good. Better part of like a minute or two soaking this in the SuperThrive water. I brushed out a bunch of the soil that was in here. These roots are nice and soaked, and this plant should do really well. I'm just going to break it up a little bit up the center from below and spread these outer roots, these bigger roots, a little bit so it can grow. And then I'm going to go ahead and try to find my planting depth, which looks right around there. So I'm just going to backfill this soil, perlite, vermiculite mix that I have. I'll break up any clumps that come with it. All right, so now I've come to the point where I have to prune this plant, and I do not like pruning my Determinate tomato plants. I have found that the more I prune them, the worse off they do, and the less of a harvest I get. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just prune off enough leaves that it's not touching soil. And if any leaves look a little malnutritioned or just not doing too well, a little yellowed, I'm going to remove them as well. Now, if you checked into my growing tomatoes in container video about when I did my indeterminate ones, you'll see that I pruned all the suckers off. With a determinate tomato plant, I am not going to do that. So I just pruned basically enough off that they're not going to be touching the soil, but as you can see, they are still relatively tall. I'm going to continue to try to single stem this, but I'm not going to take away from tomatoes that are about to form, because with determinate tomatoes, you only get as much as the plant is willing to give you during a current season, and no more. They will grow, produce fruit, and then die off. That's it. So I'm going to go ahead, add a little bit of more perlite and vermiculite and peat moss. Let me not forget about that. Vermite and perlite help it drain. Peat moss helps it retain moisture. As far as I'm concerned, it can pretty much grow an entire bath of this stuff, but I will add some mushroom compost to give it a little bit of sturdiness. So I'm going to try to mix this up. It looks really well. I'm going to keep it about an inch or two below the pot level. And then as far as staking it, of course, it still needs to be staked up. So I have some leftover fencing posts that I used. It's about 5 foot. I'm 5'7", 5'8", so that's good. These are not really going to grow much bigger than that. So I'm going to find a spot alongside the root and push that in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this nylon rope that I have and I'm just going to stake it up. So I'm going to take this here. I'm not going to prune the suckers off of my Determinate tomato plant, and I'm not going to tie this very tight either. I'm going to give this plenty of room to grow. And I gave myself a lot of extra length so I can untie it and retie it if I have to, if I see the plant is suffering. And if you could see on this Determinate plant, I've already got tomatoes growing. 1, 2, 3 tomatoes that are growing. 4, 5, 6 on this plant. I have more blossoms that are going. They will probably grow as well as long as they become pollinated, which they should, considering the fact that I'm shaking and moving this plant a lot while I'm moving it. They are self-fertile and they will fertilize themselves, but what you can do is just come along and give them a little flick, 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 and that'll release some of the pollen to hit the stigma. And I'm gonna let the suckers grow and I'm gonna let this bush out. I do not have to trellis as tall as it is, and it should do just fine. So I have the perlite, the vermiculite. The last thing I want to do is I want to add a little bit more of the Dr. Earth's fertilizer. So I'm going to just mix that up a little bit. About a half a handful on the bottom, half a handful on the top. And I've got it trellised. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my patent pending. Remember, if you use this, you owe me money. No, I'm just kidding. It is just a PVC pipe with a couple holes, drilled about 3 to 6 inches high, 9 inches maybe. It's a pretty tall pot. Speaking of pots, this is a 5-gallon pot. When it comes to Determinate tomatoes, I will not plant 2 in the same pot like I will with Indeterminate tomatoes. Indeterminate tomatoes, I can prune the living snot out of, and I can keep airflow growing. But when it comes to Determinate tomatoes, I want them to have as much room, energy, air, and fertilizer as they can get to grow. They are going to bush out, which is going to be too much room for 2 plants in this 1 5-gallon pot. So I'm going to take this PVC pipe at an angle. I'm going to jam it down by the root system. So when I water, I will water through this, and that will bring the water down to the root system instead of possibly contaminating the leaves with disease from touching soil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same bucket that I used to rinse the root ball out with the SuperThrive in it, and I'm going to use this to water it down. Obviously, the first time I water, I really don't care about where the water goes, whether it's up top or down the pipe. Later on in the season, as I become checking this, I will just try to do down the pipe and maybe a little bit up top. So I used about 2.5 gallons of water for this one pot. You say that's a lot of water. I say that's not really a lot of water. When it comes to all this dry peat moss and mushroom compost, it needs that much water. It will retain that water, and then I don't have to come back and water every other day. I will have a more consistent moisture content in this container. That will, and it is pouring out the bottom, which is a good sign. Recapture some of that. If you want to grow tomatoes, it's okay. This Determinate tomato is great for patios. It's great for porches. It's great for small gardens. You can grow a certain amount of tomatoes in a certain amount of time and then be done with it. They will die off and you pick what you get, and that's what you get. I'm gonna throw some mulch on top. I mulch just about every plant that I can. The only plant that I do not mulch is my lettuces, because they kind of act as their own mulch. They will shade out the ground enough, because I do a very high intensity lettuce grow. That will keep moisture in the soil. It will prevent weeds. I just try to keep it away from the stem if I can, because it can prevent rot. So I put about an inch or two of mulch on top of this tomato plant, and there you go. That's it. That's all to it. It was that simple. Can you believe it? I've already got tomatoes growing on this. I am not going to prune off the flowers. I'm not going to prune off the tomatoes. I'm not going to encourage this tree or this plant to grow 10 feet tall. It's never going to. So I'm going to leave the blossoms. I'm going to leave the tomatoes. I'm going to leave the suckers. And I'm going to let this thing bush out like crazy. This is an amazing tomato to grow. I love you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit about the difference between indeterminate and determinate tomatoes and how to plant them. It's virtually the same, except for the fact is I'm not as aggressive with my pruning. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Determinate Tomatoes in my backyard garden. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that post notification bell. And if you want your family and friends to be involved in this, you can. Now, I just have one last thing to add. Do you see this tray of seedlings? I still need to give it away. I've only gotten one email response to somebody who wanted some seedlings. I gave them the information. They haven't gotten back to me. So I have in my greenhouse, I have indeterminate tomatoes, determinate tomatoes. I have seedlings. I have squashes. I have melons. I have artichokes. I have a plethora of different plants that I am not going to be able to plant this year. I always do this. I plant a lot more than I should have. And I'm telling you, if you want a successful garden, maybe you should do the same, because you can always throw out the weak ones, okay? So I have all these plants I do not need. If you want some of my plants, it is perfectly fine. They are 100% free. I don't need anything from you. You don't even have to subscribe to my channel, but I encourage you to do. All you have to do is email me at gardenstategrowing@gmail.com. Let me know who you are. Maybe throw me a link on your Facebook profile so I can see you're not a psychopath. And then I will give you my contact information. You can come down, you can pick up seedlings, you could pick up a nice 3 or 4 foot tomato plant to plant on your patio or in your back gardening bed. And like I said, I want nothing from you. Okay? Nothing from you. You can just have it. I just don't want to see them go to waste. Okay? I love you. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.